hello everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of the Lighting Lounge. How are you doing tonight, Aid?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's nice and warm here in the UK, and we don't take that lightly. We enjoy it while we can. So yes, so it's nice to be here. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the longer, brighter evenings. It's nice to be able to, leave work and it not be pitch black when you leave the shop.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, it is nice, isn't it? It's when you get the winter time and it's dark at 4 o'clock and I can't be bothered to do anything. And now I finish the day or finish the day's work and run around in the sunshine for a bit. It's cool.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, and it gives you some opportunities to go out and take pictures too. If you're dependent on sunlight.
Good point. Which is almost dragging us kicking and screaming to the point, isn't it? Actually, the topic of this podcast, even dare I say?
Yeah, it is. I would think it was a thought about transition, but sometimes these things happen.
Brilliant, absolutely, absolutely stunning. You'll go far in this business, I'm sure.
Yeah. The money's rolling in already. I can just feel it. Anyways, yes. So we wanted to talk about actually getting into some flash photography stuff tonight. And,
yes,
which is very exciting because that's what I really love, and I think it's what gets you excited too. So
it is something I thoroughly enjoy. I have been doing some more of that this week. More product photography for my wife Emma's craft shop, which is can be creative. It is possibly more of a technical exercise, but I think today we can geek out a little bit, can't we, and talk a little bit technically, because some of these things you do need to practice, and you do need to know how things work in order to get the results you're after, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. We can talk about what we've done a bit too. I was actually in Frankfurt on Saturday and took part in a workshop there with an Australian photographer, and it was
cool.
The title of the workshop was Studio Photography. So that was kind of fun, and
okay,
I got to play with some
tell me more
big
about
lights.
that then.
Well, he's a fashion portrait photographer from Australia.
Right.
Peter Coulson is his name.
Right.
He's got a YouTube channel which has got a lot of fantastic information, and so I decided to treat myself to a workshop with him. It was pretty pricey, but I went ahead and took a shot, and it was a fun day. One of the downsides was that there was a lot of people there that had really big, really expensive cameras and very little clue of how to use them. So that was something that was a bit frustrating, I think, to me and to him as well. So there was a lot of, how do you turn on the electronic shutter? How do you turn off the electronic shutter? Why can't I see anything in my mirrorless camera? It's all black.
Okay.
These kinds of things. So, anyways, this with a, 8,000.
Well, let's start with that one.
Yeah.
I can't see anything because my screen's black.
Yeah.
I know why my camera does that.
Yep.
So my camera does that because it is trying to reflect the composition that you've got set in the camera.
The exposure.
Thank you. The exposure. And of course, let's say if you're using, I don't know if you're using a manufacturer native TTL system, whether it works this out automatically, but I don't. I use third-party equipment, and that means that my camera doesn't know it's just about to fire the flash. And so it's just faithfully reporting that I've horrendously underexposed my shot, so much so that nothing shows at all.
Yep. Yeah. So that was exactly the problem, was that when you've got your, for my camera, it's called exposure preview. And the different cameras have different things, all of which is completely irrelevant in analog because there is no digital viewfinder in an analog camera, but that's okay.
Good point. Our digital colleagues have to start somewhere, though, even if it's slightly behind. Yeah.
So if you're previewing your exposure either on the back screen or in your viewfinder, and as you say, you're your goal is actually to underexpose so much that you get to black. And
yes,
yeah.
So, well, that's a technical point, isn't it? I suppose that is if that is indeed your goal.
Yeah, true.
And just to close off the thought before we move on to that next bit, I do have a setting in my camera that says don't try and emulate the exposure, just show me what you can see.
Yeah.
And then it shows you something that you can work with. But tell me, so let's start with that first principle then. So not so much fade to black, but actually starting with black. So why would you personally be wanting a black exposure?
Well, there's two different circumstances. Either you want to completely eliminate the light that is in the room or the studio, whatever, and just start with black, because that means that your camera is not getting any exposure from the ambient light. It's all of the light is coming from your flash, your added light. The other possibility is to say, okay, I want to mix these lights and maybe have the background be a certain exposure and then add light with the flash on top of that. And then you have some sort of light coming from the ambient or the background light, and then you're adding to that with the flash.
It's one of the easier ones to get, but removing the ambient light or killing off the ambient light, it just means exactly what we've just described, which is setting that exposure, that base level of exposure in your camera, so that the ambient light, whatever it might be, is not impacting the picture that you make. Typically that is reasonably straightforward to do if you are indoors. You can work, you don't have to work in the dark, never, not in the slightest. And you can have room lights on, or you could have a light at the other end of the room, or whatever it is, because where you're setting, when you apply the flash, it applies so much more light than the ambient light that it's easy to get a good exposure with the flash whilst not letting the ambient light impact your image at all. So I guess that's the why of the technique, isn't it? It's like, why would you, partly. And then just another one on jargon, which we might come to later. It's when you're mixing artificial light or added light with your ambient light. People start to say things like, "Oh well, you need to expose for 2 stops below ambient and then fill," right? And which is another technical terminology, I guess, as well to a point. And we'll talk more about mixing light sources later, because that's a lot of fun as well. But 2 stops below ambient would literally be 2 stops underexposed. And then fill refers to using your flash, your speed lights, or your studio strobes, or whatever your artificial light is, to bring the exposure back up to the right level for your subject. So let's say it is, John Michael, you do this a lot, don't you? I mean, your model shots and all of that. You're lighting them to the right level to a really good exposure, and let the background fall where it may, underexposed, so it doesn't detract.
Yeah, or do something different with the background. It's all about what you want to create and how to get there. So if you were to start working with Flash and maybe want to try and start doing some creative things with Flash and haven't played with it much before, then starting with black is a really good way to kind of at least know, okay, whatever is coming, whatever's showing up in my picture, it's coming from the flash. Because otherwise you might wonder, like, why is there always a highlight on the background? Or why is there always this thing glowing on the left and all my light's coming from the right? How is it getting all the way around? And, maybe it's a window or a door open or something that's leaking light onto your image that you're not expecting. And I guess that's one.
With film photography, because of course you don't necessarily get to see the options there. I mean, you can use digital to cheat at the course of this point. You could have with you a digital camera and do exactly what we've just described, which is set the exposure. Don't explosure's not a good thing. Exposure to a light level, which gives you that black, and then copy those settings over to your film camera. That's a great way. There are many light metering apps on a phone that would allow you to do that as well. Although, of course, on the phone you can't change the aperture of your lens, so you would need to do some little mental arithmetic or back of a piece of paper arithmetic to make sure that you were transposing the numbers correctly. Because if your phone has an aperture of f2.8 and you're wanting to shoot with your main camera at f8, then you've got 3 stops of difference there. Is it 3? 2.8? 4, 5.68. Yeah, 3 stops of difference. Sorry, I've never been any good. I know the numbers, but I can never tell you how many stops apart 2 of those numbers are. That's really, I always, it's very difficult for me. Never really got the hang of that. So it is better to do that if you're going to want that level of confidence that comes from knowing that the background, the ambient is really dialed out. Then a digital camera that allows you to do manual settings that would be exactly the same as what you hope to shoot with on a film camera is more reliable than trying to do it with a phone app, although it is possible with a phone app.
Well, the phone app will be great for giving you the ambient, but you're not going to be able to get your flash exposure with the phone. At least I don't have anything.
So I was just dialing it out. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So let's let's go on to the next thing then and talk about, okay, so we've got a black exposure now. How do we start adding light to that? So how do you trigger your flashes?
How do I trigger my flashes? That's a good question. I have a fairly inexpensive Chinese system which has a radio trigger that goes in the hot shoe of my camera, and the flashes have radio receivers in them. So this is a speedlight system by a company called Yongnuo, who were all the rage a few years ago. You can almost tell what year people bought their equipment in by what brand was popular enough and cheap enough at the time.
Godox is the hot thing now.
Yeah, Godox wasn't around so much when I bought these, because I've had them for quite a few years, probably going on 10 years actually.
Oh wow.
Because I had them when my kids were young, much younger. But I have 4 speed lights and the transmitter for the price of like one Nikon or Canon speed light. So it is a very affordable way to get into this stuff and to get into off-camera flash, which is I think I'm not going to say it's where we all want to be all the time, but it does give you a lot more creative options for how you control your light if your flash is not mounted on top of your camera. So so I trigger my flashes using a radio system. I have had in the past completely dumb radio systems where you buy some really, really cheap units that are literally just triggers. So you put the transmitter in a hot shoe on your camera, and the receiver units simply have a hot shoe on the top of them, and you put your flash into the hot shoe on top of the radio receiver. And those are equally good, apart from one small thing, which is that you can't remotely change the power of your flash if you're doing that. So if you've got a flash on top of a tall light stand that's 10 feet tall, every time you want to change your settings and dial it in, you need to then lower that or get a ladder out or something to change it. So happily, for those that haven't tried it yet and are thinking about trying it, actually the radio systems with remote control of the flash power are actually really affordable these days for manual flash.
They're quite reasonable. I've got the Yongnuo system as well, and it's got a nice little trigger. This is the one that I have. It's
mine looks identical to that.
So you can arrange your flashes into different groups, and you can adjust the power from your camera, which is very convenient.
That was a game changer for me when I first got a system that could do that, because I had the raw triggering functionality before, and I was like, oh, this is so much better.
So one thing that I found super helpful with that is I actually put a little letter on my flashes.
Okay.
Because I'm always forgetting, you've got groups A, B, and C, and basically any system you've got will have those things. But I always forget, like, is A in the soft box, or is B in the soft box, or what's where, and that sort of thing. So I got some of these little, labels, little stickers, and just put A, B, and C on my flashes. And I've actually got I've got an X and a Y as well. I've got 5 flashes in total. And what I like to do is I will put the X or the Y into one of my other groups. So, if A needs a lot of power, then I'll just program one of my extra flashes to that A. And so I'll gang them together to get some extra juice.
So let's give a little bit of context around that then. So this is for when you are using a multi-light setup and you want different flash power from the different flashes. How do you deal with that with a radio system? Well, as you just said, the flashes can be set to be in different groups. It's a bit like if people who played with walkie-talkies and you have to choose a channel, you will have to be on the same channel. And when you were a kid and had cheap walkie-talkies with analog radios in them, everybody would get like all sorts of cross signals. Nowadays you get digital tuners inside the walkie-talkies, and you can be very precise with the frequency you can use, and you can set a frequency that you talk to it, and it's a bit similar to that. It's a bit different as well, because what I was talking about there was actual radio frequency, and what we're talking about with the flashes is the message that you send. So a flash that's in group A will listen only to messages intended for group A. So when you say, group A, I want a bit more power from you, please, that only the group A flashes will respond to that, and the group B flashes will ignore it until you give the group B an instruction. So you could have, let's say you had a 3-light portrait setup. You could have each of your 3 lights in a different group, and therefore you could set them to different powers, and often if they have zoomable heads, different zooms as well, and you can do all of that remotely from your camera, without having to worry about step ladders or adjusting lighting stands and then putting them back in the wrong place, or all sorts of nonsense like that. So really, really powerful stuff to have those radio trigger systems.
If you are going to get into some kind of system like that, then do a little bit of research and just be sure that your trigger, your transmitter will talk to your flashes, because not all, even within the same brand, Yongnuo has 2 different systems. One is TTL capable, which is, we'll talk about that maybe in a minute, and the other one is not, and those 2 are non-compatible, so you can't get some of the flashes talking to the triggers and that sort of thing. So just be sure that if you're going to get into stuff, be sure that you're getting stuff that's going to work together smoothly, because it can
really
be a
good
pain.
point. Yes. And I have to say, well, let's ask the question. So do you shoot in TTL or do you shoot in manual?
I do manual. I don't have any TTL equipment. I've tried it. I was with another photographer who had it, and so TTL is basically your camera or the flash will fire a little pulse, and the camera will look and see how bright that pulse is, and use that information to try and figure out how bright the flashes should be to match the exposure that you want to have. And the more sophisticated the system, the better it will do that, I guess. I found it really confusing, because I wanted to, I said, I want a bit more flash power. How do I do that? And he said, well, open your aperture. And I was like, what? No, I want to turn the flash up. So anyways,
yes.
I think TTL is fantastic for things like weddings, or, where you have to move fast and you're constantly changing. Then you can let the computer and the wizardry in the camera and the flash figure it out for you.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, it is very good for that, certainly. because every situation is different when you're doing something like that, isn't it? So you can't say, oh, if I set it and then it'll be fine for everything I do. You almost the TTL capability really gives you the ability to, without thinking about it, get your exposures right, your flash exposures right.
Yeah.
And yeah, that which very, very important. But I have to say, I don't think. No, actually, I know. Actually, the setup, the units that I have are not TTL units. I was going to say they might be Nikon compatible, but given that I shoot with a Fuji, it makes no difference at all. So you'll see often that if you're buying these things, actually, this is good buyer's guide moment here. You will see that the non-TTL units are cheaper. And the TTL units are branded. They're not the product itself isn't branded, but the description of the product will say this is compatible with the Canon TTL system, or this is compatible with the Sony TTL system.
Yeah.
And that is something that is important to get right if that's your thing, because if you buy the Canon one and you shoot with Sony's, it probably isn't going to work.
No, it causes all kinds of trouble. Last year, or was it? I guess it was last year. We did a little photo meetup in our Tango studio, and there was, I think, 30 photographers there, and we set up 4 or 5 different flash setups in the same room, and just getting all of those things working together and not crossing channels or not having triggers for everybody that were going to work on their cameras, and it was quite an adventure getting all of that stuff
that's true
set up.
Yes,
so,
I can imagine. So that's where the radio frequency bit does come in. So you'll find that most speed lights will have a channel as well as a group, and the channel allows you to deconflict the messages flying around through space if you're shooting with other people.
And at least with the Yongnuo ones, and I think it's for others, it's pretty similar. But it's your channel is a number and your group is a letter. So you can set those things up.
And it's all doable from the device that sits on the hot shoe of your camera. So you'll recognize anybody that's looking at these online. You'll recognize them because they have a bit like a flash without the flash, a bit like a speed light without the head. They will have buttons, and they will have a screen, and you will be able to use the buttons to navigate and change the settings, and that then determines what messages get sent when you take the shot.
So let's drag ourselves back into the film era a bit.
Yes.
What if you want to shoot with a camera that doesn't have a hot shoe? I don't know if that's something you've done much of.
Okay. Do you know what? I haven't. I mean, so many film cameras will have a PC connector. I've never figured out what PC stands for. Do you know what PC stands for?
Oh, you got me. I don't know.
I know. So often that is a little round unit. It looks a little bit like a 3.5mm audio, like an old headphone cable socket. It's a bit smaller than that, I think, and maybe it's a coax cable as well. But it's a little round hole, basically, often on the front of a film SLR, or if you've got a medium format camera which has got a bit more space on the body, then it'll be somewhere on the body, different brand by brand. But yeah, if you don't have a hot shoe to trigger, then often you can plug a little cable into that, and that will be linked in some way to the shutter mechanism in your camera, and it will fire mechanically. No, it must be an electrical signal.
It actually short circuits.
Is that how it works?
Yeah. What happens is that because I've taken apart several cameras and seen how that works. So it's actually when the shutter fires, one of these little wheels or something will close a circuit, which closes the PC sync is basically just 2 cables. There's one that goes on the outside, and there's a pin that goes inside, and that's insulated. And when those two get connected, then it basically tells the flash, okay, that's a short circuit, let's fire.
That's very interesting. You're a very knowledgeable man.
So when the shutter goes and that mechanism, it'll close that circuit, and that'll fire it off. And that's why if you've ever if you're plugging in a PC cable and your flashes are on and live, you're probably going to get some misfires while you're plugging that in, because it's very easy to short circuit that while you're plugging it in.
Right.
Which is, it's not dramatic, nothing happens, but just, be aware that when you're plugging in that PC cable, it can misfire.
Okay, that's so. As you can tell, I haven't really used those. The only non-hot shoe based systems I've used are things like a Diana camera, which which has two, by comparison, massive metal prongs that go down into the body. But if you so one way to do that, if you have a Diana camera or other cameras that have a non-standard socket, is to get the adapter. So I know for Dianas you can buy. Because when I had a Diana, I had one. You can buy a converter that effectively is the two metal prongs you need, and it's just a little plastic box with a hot shoe, a basic hot shoe on the top of it. So then you can plug your whatever's. You can use a normal flash on your camera, or you can use a triggering system like we've just been discussing.
Interesting. So when you're working with the PC port, what I want to do is I want to be able to use my flashes with any camera that is flash capable. So what I've got is I've got several now, but the basic thing is I've got a little cube here, and it's got a hot shoe on the top, and it's got a PC sync port on the side. And so this is basically an external hot shoe. So you connect this little PC port to the PC port on your camera, and this has got a hot shoe on it as well. So if you've got like a cold shoe or an accessory shoe on your camera, then you can stick it in there so it's not just dangling around.
So if your camera, because there are cameras out there that have a cold shoe, and just for completeness, a cold shoe is one that will not trigger a flash, but it looks the same. A hot shoe will trigger a flash. A cold shoe won't, but it will hold stuff and attach stuff to your camera.
Yeah.
So, or if you're working with some other kind of setup, like if your camera has a cage on it or something like that, which I guess is, then you could have, you could put that on there, can you? So you plug in the PC sync cable into the camera, and then the other end into your little box there, which you could put in a cold shoe. And then, but it converts the PC sync signal to a standard hot shoe.
To a standard hot shoe, and then you can put your wireless transmitter from your flash or whatever you want to do on top of that, and go about your merry way. And so that's a nice little accessory to have if you have cameras that are that don't have a hot shoe. This is my Cheap Shots camera, which is from 1940, something like that.
Yeah, it's a folder.
It's an old folder, yeah.
Yeah.
And lovely. It does, I don't know, where can you see it? Here, on the bottom here. It's probably, anybody who's looking at the video will see me trying to do this, and if not, believe me that on the bottom of the lens here, there's a little PC sync port, and that's where the cable gets plugged in. Okay. And that maybe leads us on nicely to the next thing that we have to worry about with flash. This old folding camera has a leaf shutter in it.
Oh, well, that's a joy when you're shooting with flash. Yeah. That's a good thing.
Yep. So,
I always tie myself in knots trying to describe this.
All right, well, let me try.
Because I know, do you know what the thing I always can never get right is the description of how a leaf shutter actually works. And that's the thing, right? I know the consequences and I know how to work with it, but if you know how a leaf shutter works, start there.
So a leaf shutter has usually got 5 blades, and they open all at the same time around the nodal point of the lens. So the nodal point is where all of the light rays get bundled together by the front elements of the lens, and then they flip in the middle of the lens, and then they get spread out by the elements in the back of the lens. So that middle point is called the nodal point, and that's where all of the light is very kind of concentrated in the same place. And that's a really practical place to have a shutter, because it doesn't have to be as big as if you have it at the back of the lens or behind the lens. The
in this case, one characteristic of a leaf shutter is that it is built into the lens.
Yeah. So if you have, in the folding camera here, it's not changeable. It's built in, but some of the larger middle format cameras, medium format cameras have interchangeable lenses that also have leaf shutters built into them. So you've got
when I had my Bronica, for example, that had leaf shutters.
Yeah. So because of that smaller area that needs to be controlled by the shutter, then all of the blades of the leaf shutter, they actually move out of the way, out of that circle, all at the same time. And so the circle is completely open for X amount of time. Usually the leaf shutters don't have as high of a maximum shutter speed as a curtain shutter would, but whatever their top shutter speed is, you can sync the flash to that speed.
Because the flash fires when the blades are fully open.
Yeah.
Because the fire of the flash is such a short period of time, you get all of that light evenly across your film or digital sensor if you have a digital camera with a leaf shutter, and therefore you can achieve a full exposure across the whole of the film plane at whatever shutter speed the camera is capable of, because typically your flash, the actual flash, will be a much shorter duration than the period of your shutter being open. And so okay.
So the trick is to fire that flash through the hole in your lens at the right moment, so that the whole film or sensor gets hit by that flash. And I think a typical, flash duration is another story, but, say a 20,000th of a second or something like that is kind of a typical speed light duration. So
often depends on how much power you're using in the flash as well in speed light. So it's again, rabbit hole. So don't let me go down the rabbit hole too much. But when you're dialing up and down your power, the power of your flash, often an element of that actually increases or decreases the length of time the flash is actually firing for. So the length of time it is emitting light.
And that's important if you're photographing something that's moving very quickly, like a drop of water or a rocket or something, or
a bullet.
Or I saw a video of somebody using a blender, trying to freeze the motion on a blender's spinning blades.
That's turning it like 2,000 RPM.
Something like that, yeah. So you could see that even with the flash, the speed light was at full power, we're still getting a significant amount of motion blur from the blender.
So hold that thought, because we've got to do the other side of this equation, which is a double curtain shutter, isn't it? But the point of or the benefit of a leaf shutter is that you can use your flash at whatever speed that you want to. Now, I used to have this is I'm sure I've said this before. It's one of basically the camera that I regret selling. I don't really regret it. It's not one of life's biggest regrets, but a camera that I genuinely miss and wish I hadn't sold was the Fuji X20, which was a small point and shoot camera, which from about 10 years ago, and it had a leaf shutter built in, and you could synchronize the flash at a 2,000th of a second. So you could really, when we talked earlier about killing the ambient, with this camera and a couple of speed lights, you could kill the sun. Almost, or at least, actually that's a bit unfair, you probably couldn't do that, but what you could do is you could definitely properly underexpose the ambient with an aperture that still allowed your flash to be effective, which is amazing, which you could never do with an SLR. Because SLRs, well, let's talk about it. And this is actually, it's not related to SLRs so much as it is related to the type of shutter in your camera. But of course, so it affects modern mirrorless digital cameras, digital SLRs, film SLRs, rangefinders. Anything that's got two curtains. And this is because of the way the shutter opens and closes. So this is the bit I do know, right, I think, but correct me if I get it wrong. The way that the shutter opens is that the first curtain travels across the shutter, so it goes from being closed to opening, and then the second curtain is what closes the shutter back off again. Now, if you have a shutter speed of 1 second, this can be done in a very orderly process without any fuss. So the first curtain will open the shutter in a tiny fraction of a second, and then the shutter will be open for a while, and then the second curtain will close it, and you then get a good period of time in which you could fire your flash, and to have that at a point in time when the shutter is fully open. Now, that's all good at a second. What happens when you get to shorter shutter speeds is that there's never a point where the shutter is fully open and your film or sensor are fully exposed, because to achieve the shorter shutter speeds, and we're talking here of, typically, and you'll all know this because all your cameras have got flash sync speeds, typically of a 2/50th of a second or faster, so less, anything less than a 2/50th of a second. There is no point in time at which your camera, sensor or film is fully exposed. What happens is that the second curtain travels very quickly behind the first curtain, and your film or sensor is exposed as a slit. So effectively a slit goes upwards or downwards or left to right, depending on the camera, across the film. And that's why you have a maximum sync speed for your camera, because for the lighting to be effective, the speed light, the flash to be effective, it needs to be able to hit the whole of the sensor for the whole of its duration. So anybody that's ever misdialed their shutter speed and has had half of their film or half of their digital photo completely underexposed and thinking, why on earth is there an enormous shadow, or why is that completely black? What's going on here? It's because when the flash fired, that part of the film was not exposed because the shutter wasn't open for that part of the film. Have I got that right?
Yeah. The curtains.
That felt quite. I was quite nervous there.
No, that was great. That was great. The curtains, basically, the first and the second curtain, or the first and the second shutter, they usually travel at the same speed. Like the physical speed of the curtain opening or closing is the same regardless of whatever you dial your shutter speed into. So the curtain will move at, call it 125th of a second out of the way, and then the second one will close at that same speed. And so you can't make that gap any faster, because the curtains can't physically travel faster than that without tearing themselves apart.
Sorry, yes, I hadn't meant to suggest the curtains travelled at different speeds. It's the lag.
Yeah.
It's the amount of time between the triggering of the first one and the triggering of the second one that changes, not the actual speed of travel of the curtains themselves.
Yeah. No, and that's why they developed this kind of slit trick to overcome that problem of, physics, not being able to move the curtain out of the way fast enough to get a shorter, fully exposed frame.
Yes. So anybody with a £6,000 DSLR is going to have less joy when shooting flash than somebody with a pocketable rangefinder from the 1960s, because the little rangefinder is going to have a leaf shutter.
Yeah.
And the big SLR has not a leaf shutter.
Yeah, so leaf shutters are fun because, as we said, you can use that to get a higher shutter speed and control more of your ambient light with the shutter speed.
Yes, and it's amazing the lengths that engineers have to go to with these substandard, dual curtain shutters to get an equivalent of the something that the simple and good old-fashioned leaf shutter technology can do really easily. I'm talking about high-speed sync for those that shoot with digital cameras. And this is a whole wonderful engineering solution to a problem that is really caused by, well, yeah, I was going to say it's caused primarily by economics and people not wanting to pay too much for their lenses, because lenses with leaf shutters are more expensive to make because they've got more stuff in them. And there is also, and so, yeah, over time, having the shutter in the camera has become the standard, because then your lenses don't need to be so difficult to make and they're not so expensive to buy. There is also a technical limitation, is that leaf shutters, as you said yourself, John Michael, don't typically get open for more than about a 500th of a second. They can't really work fast. I think
there are a couple out there that are like up to 1,000 or something on the older cameras, but usually a 500th is kind of your top speed.
Yes, so that would then impact in a negative way the range of exposures you have available to you when you're not shooting with flash. So sometimes on a bright sunny day, a 500th doesn't cut it. You need a 2000th, right? So there are both technical and economic reasons why over time leaf shutters effectively fell out of favour, and dual curtain shutters became the norm. But it does mean that your modern digital photographer with thousands and thousands of pounds, dollars, euros worth of kit is in a disadvantaged state.
Yeah, and that's at this workshop that I was at, he was shooting on one of the new Hasselblad mirrorless cameras, which is a modern camera. It was the X2, I think.
Right. Okay.
Which is also a leaf shutter system. So it's it's a medium format digital camera with a leaf shutter in the lens. And I think his could sync up to 2,000th of a second or something like that. So
okay.
But most of ours couldn't. So I brought my old Hasselblad from 1960, which also has a leaf shutter. So I was there too. So.
Oh, you were good for that. Although that particular shutter probably only goes to a 500.
It only goes to 500, but that was more than enough.
It's more than most modern. I mean, you buy top of the range digital mirrorless cameras, from any of the main brands, and they will top out at a 250th.
Yeah.
Some of them are 200th.
Yeah.
I think my Fuji is 250.
Well, and the bigger the sensor, the slower it is as well too, because the I think the full frame DSLRs are something like 160, and the crop sensors.
Some of them are, aren't they?
The crop, because again, you got to go less distance, so you can get that done in a faster speed.
Yes.
Anyways,
doesn't matter how much titanium your shutter curtains are made of.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's one thing that you want to be aware of. If you're gonna shoot flash, figure out what your flash sync speed is, and just stay under that for whatever camera you're using.
Yes. Indeed. Sorry, go ahead.
Some systems like the Pentax 6.7, they also have leaf shutter lenses that you can attach to that camera. So usually you've got a focal plane shutter, but there are leaf shutter lenses that you can put in there, because I think the Pentax 6.7 has a flash sync speed of a 25th of a second.
Does it? Oof.
Something like that.
That's a big old.
Well, it's a long way for that shutter to go.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, so I think that's enough about flash sync, isn't it? I don't know.
Well, just a quick note on high speed sync. So for people that have heard of it but don't know what it is, so to combat this issue of the fact that your sensor or film is not is not open all at the same time, and therefore you've got a slit, a high speed sync system effectively uses a strobing mechanism. So you can only do this you can only do this on the TTL capable speed lights that will actually talk to the camera and receive, and so that they know how to do it. But a high speed sync will effectively strobe. You won't see it because it happens faster than your eyes can react, and the persistence of vision in your eyes. But they effectively strobe, and that then allows them to go. If you imagine the curtain moving across, or the two curtains moving across the sensor or film, and the slit is effectively moving across the sensor. If you strobe enough times and in the right sequence at the right times, you could actually then evenly illuminate the whole of your film or sensor. Rather a technical, high-tech, electronic-based engineering problem to overcome the characteristics of the focal plane shutter. But it does come at a cost, because typically your lights will not be able to strobe with the same intensity of light as they would do if they were just doing it in one hit, because they've got massive capacitors in them that stores the electricity, and they convert that to light, and that's all good. But if you ask it to do that 10 times in a 500th of a second, it can't emit as much light as it can if you just say, oh, it's all right, mate, just go for the big one. If you could say, just do it once, just let it all go, all of that capacity, just let it all go in one big hit. You'll get a lot more light that way out of your light than if you ask it to strobe. So the high speed sync does come at there is a cost to it, in the sense that you'll get less light out of your light, or less usable light out of your light.
Yeah, and
that's probably all I want to say about high speed sync. It's a horrible, nasty thing. Buy leaf shutter cameras instead.
Well, and either a leaf shutter or a high speed sync or something like a neutral density filter, those are all tricks to be able to use a more wide open aperture with flash, or in bright daylight, so that you can, if you want to have a nice portrait with a shallow depth of field, but it's bright light, or, shooting at 1.8, your flash might not go down far enough to be able to get a good exposure. Because no matter what flash you have, there's going to be kind of a minimum amount of light that it's going to put out. And if you're shooting at 1.4 or something, and you put your flash on minimum, it's still probably going to be too much for a lot of situations.
I've been using a 3-stop ND filter with flash for the product photography, for the craft shop. So we're doing a lot of tabletop photography, and I have my 4-foot octabox effectively hovered above it, because what you want is a very even spread of soft light for that kind of work. And even at the lowest powers, so I have 2 speed lights inside a 4-foot octabox, and I can't go down to 1 because then I don't get an even enough spread of light, because the box is too big for the size of the light. So the minimum I can have in there is 2 speed lights, and I do that, and I put them on their minimum power, which is 128th of their full power, and the octabox then is hovering about 3 feet above the tabletop, so it's quite close, but that gives it an amazingly soft spread of light, so that's really good for the quality of light. The problem is you then need to shoot at f/22 or something. It's like, pretty sure my lens is diffracting by then. So how do I get down to, because your base ISO, which for that particular camera is I think 200 ISO, so that's the downside of modern digital cameras. Often they have higher base ISOs, and I'm shooting at maximum shutter speed, so it's a 250th that I'm allowed to have, and I still need f/22. To even if my speed lights are on their lowest power, and I'm like that. So you have to, it can't be f/22, it must be about 18 or something like that. But some of them you need to have, these tables, there's a way you do these things. You want to have a slightly blurred background, so you want to be shooting at about f/4.
Okay.
Or maybe 5.6, so that you can get a little bit of blur in about 5.6. So how do you get a system that just can't get a right exposure down to something that fits? And the answer is an ND filter. So I'm doing all of this indoor studio tabletop photography with a 3-stop ND filter on the lens, just so I can cut out some of that light, and so I can shoot at the aperture that I want to shoot at. So that's another use for ND filters.
And that ties us nicely back into the things we were talking about a show or two ago, where we were talking about types of light and direction, because another option would be to move the light further away, because then you'd lose the light.
Yes.
But then you're going to be having a different quality. It's not going to be as soft and fluffy as it is if it's nice and close. So you're always, whatever you're doing, you're trying to balance these different limitations and advantages to get the picture that you want to have.
Yes, you're building your scene, aren't you?
Yeah.
And so and you're working. This is what I call the technical craft element of it. So, which is that you need to understand at the technical level what each of the changes that you make is likely to do, or maybe putting it another way around, when it doesn't look like what you want it to look like, you need to be able to troubleshoot that and solve the problem and get to where you need to be. So in my case, I was like, rummage around in the drawer. Now I've got to, like, does the lens I'm using, do I have an ND filter for the lens that I'm using, or do I need to find the step up or step down rings, step up rings as well? What have I got? So I dig in the drawer, find the different. It's like, okay, and as it happens, the lens I was using was the lens I use on the rare occasions I shoot video.
Okay.
And so I actually had a good quality Tiffin at 3-stop ND for that particular lens. So it was very straightforward in the end of just screwing it on and leaving it there. Other times I do have some other filters which are from lesser brands, right? So you can buy these things very affordably, and they're not always bad, but especially with ND filters, they're not N. Right? Yeah, they're not neutral.
Yeah. Especially with color.
Yes, they will have a color cast of some sort to them, even if it's only very, very slight. So I mean, they're usually, so I suppose, neutral in the sense that they will have the same level of stopping power evenly across the glass. So they're neutral in the light sense, I suppose. They're not gradient ones or whatever, but they're definitely not color neutral. So it is always, if you have a use case that is technically sensitive, right, to things like color, and you need to get all of that right. Sadly, it is much easier and possibly quite important to buy the more expensive stuff. Although, of course, there's another really great way of getting around that, which is something that you use quite a lot, isn't it? You shoot black and white.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to get rid of all color problems, is just to not shoot color. But another thing that you could actually do would be to put diffusion film in front of your flashes, because there are little full it's like cellophane kind of. It's basically a neutral gel that all it does is it takes light out. So you could be reducing your light on your flashes at that end rather than in front of the lens.
Yeah, so you're effectively, your softbox is emitting less light.
Yeah.
So you can do that on the lights themselves, and or some softboxes will allow you to put two.
They'll have a double diffusion in them.
Yeah, double diffusion.
Or you could raise your softbox up and put a like a diffuser, like from a 5-in-1 kind of thing. You could extend the difference, the space between. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. So
definitely. Yeah. It's yes, just to try and stop the light. So yes, you can stop it at the light, or you can stop it getting into the camera.
Yeah. So one thing that we've kind of danced around a bit, but how do we actually figure out what settings we need to get an exposure that we want when we're dealing with flash? Because if I take my little Spotmatic, my Pentax Spotmatic camera, it's got a match needle light meter in there, and I'm certainly not fast enough to see what that's doing when I pop the flash off. So so there's some different options for getting your exposure correct with film, and one that we've definitely mentioned several times is using a digital camera to cheat. When you do that, what do you look for? Or how do you actually expose your camera and then transfer that to your film camera?
That's just a question of trial and error. At that point, you take the shot with the digital camera, and once you're happy with the settings, and that's the settings of everything, the shutter, the aperture, clearly if it's a film camera, your speed is set anyway, and of course the lights, so the power of the individual lights and their location relative to the subject, because if you move that, then you've got to start again. and then it's as simple for me as take the radio trigger off the digital camera, pop it on the hot shoe for the film camera, and shoot away. Because the important thing is the signal that is sending the signal, and it's the radio trigger that sets the message, and it is the camera's hot shoe that tells it when to send. So you don't need to, as long as your film camera has the right aperture, and your digital camera is set with the ISO that your film is, and you've got a shutter speed that works. It doesn't need to be the same shutter speed, but a shutter speed that works. Then you're going to get a decent enough exposure of your subject.
Yep. So that's I like to get a bit more specific with it. Okay. When I'm doing a portrait, for example, or something, I like to, because when I'm looking at the back of my digital camera, it's often, I look at it and I go, oh yeah, that looks great. It's just the way I want it. And then I get it home and I open it up on the computer and it's like, why is it so dark? It looks underexposed. Because the brightness of the screen on my camera can be very deceiving, especially if you're outside or you're inside. That's not something that I like to depend on too much. So what I do is I will keep bumping up the exposure until I start getting highlight alert warnings on my digital camera.
Okay.
Which is basically saying to my digital camera, look out, you're about to go over the top of the the acceptable light amount for this sensor.
So if you've got like blinkies.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you ratchet up, you slowly ratchet up or step by step ratchet up the exposure till the blinkies start kicking in, telling you, right, okay, that's.
So the brightest part of the image, or the brightest part that I care about.
Because sometimes you want to blast it out to white in the background, and you don't care about that. That's supposed to be completely overexposed to nothing. Yeah.
So that's what I will look for is, the highlight. The highlight that I want is usually going to be the thing that's blowing out. And as film tends to have much more latitude going up, as in it'll take much more light before it gets overexposed. I often add a half a stop or sometimes even a full stop to that exposure. So I go with the digital until my blinkies start showing up, and then I add a little bit of light.
So you get more exposure.
So I get more exposure on the film.
I was going to say, because the good thing is if you do have your digital camera setting off a little bit for whatever reason, like the screen doesn't display very accurately, the latitude of the film will usually soak that up. But of course, if you're trying to be much more precise about it, then your way would be great. Although, of course, the other way of doing it is to use a flash meter. Do you have a flash meter?
I do have a flash meter.
Me too. I love a flash meter.
I have this little one here.
That's the same one I've got.
It's an entry level Sekonic flash meter because you can get a really cheap light meter. Really cheap. You can get old antique ones. They work great and they cost next to nothing. Flash meters are expensive though. At least this one I think was €200 or something like that, which is.
It sounds surprising. Like it's gone up in price since I bought mine, but I bought mine many years ago, actually. So I was thinking about it earlier that you can probably get a used digital camera for the price of a flash meter. Oh, easily, yeah. So flash meters are good fun though. So in the same way that you can meter more accurately if you use a light meter. So and you're not measuring, and I always get these one. Which is the incident and which is the other one? I know.
So there's incident and there's reflective.
Yeah. Okay. So incident is the one we want, isn't
incident
it?
Incident is where the light is falling directly on the meter.
Yes. So anybody who's ever seen it, I can't believe I'm just about to explain to our very learned audience how to do metering. So incident, so if you're used to incident metering, where you put the meter up to your subject's face or something like that, to get the exact exposure of the subject, you can do similar with flash. So you can set the flash, set the meter, to the relevant sensitivity, so the ISO that you're going to use in your camera, and then you trigger the flash, take a test shot, or just use the triggering mechanisms. And then it's that information that the meter, when it's in flash mode, it's that information that the meter captures and then shows on its screen. And it will tell you what aperture you need. So you'll say, oh, I am shooting at ISO 200, and then you fire it off, and it will measure the light that hits it, and it will say, okay, if you want a correct exposure at ISO 200, you need to be at f8. Or you need to be at f4 or f22 or whatever it might be.
And the thing that always confuses me with metering like that is it's telling you, if you set your meter, or if you set your camera to, let's say, f4, you do an exposure reading and it says f4, and you set your camera to f4 and then you take a picture, it will make wherever that meter was sitting gray. Because that's what the meter's looking for. It's going to say at that,
yes.
At that, if you took a pic, if you had a gray card sitting there, and you took a picture then at f4, then you would have a perfect exposure of that gray card.
Do you know what? I've never thought about it like that. That would be, I guess, because I only ever do that sort of thing for people's faces, basically. I guess.
And faces tend to be a bit more reflective than gray cards, so you get a decent exposure on it that way.
But is that how it? See, you know way more stuff than I do. I just do the level of, if I press this button, I know I'll get the outcome, right? So I never thought about that. So the meter would be looking for your 18% grey or middle grey or whatever you want to call it, and people's faces are typically not 18% grey.
If they're healthy, then hopefully not.
There are. I'm sure I've met some people whose faces, especially after big drinking sessions, have been 18% grey, or 18% green even. But So tell me how that works. So
the light meter is, especially when you're getting your incident light meter reading, and this confuses the hell out of me. So I might be getting it totally wrong, but my understanding is that when you've got your incident light meter, it's measuring the light that is falling on the meter. And
yes,
you've got this little half dome here, which basically means that if because my face is half dark, half light, and if I point the meter towards the camera, then the little dome is getting half dark and half light.
Yes.
Bridge of what's happening on my face. And so when you take your meter reading there, it's saying all this light that's coming in is f4 for a middle exposure. So if it was purely black and white on my face, if I was blown out on one side and completely dark on the other side, and it averaged, then that's the picture you would get. But if you were to take a meter reading on the bright side of my face, for example, and the other half you still wanted to have some details in, and you took a meter reading on the bright side, it would say, oh, okay, well, this is the exposure you're going to need. You're going to need f2.8 on that side, or no, you would need 5.6 on that side because it's a stop brighter than the other side. Now,
and you need 2.8 or 2 on the darker side.
Yeah. And so you can get into trouble with that.
You can, yeah. So I guess it's especially if you're being creative with the light. So if you wanted to, if you were doing a split light shot where you wanted that half of the face to be pretty much in the black, then you would. What I would do is I would meter 3 spots. I'd meter on the light side, I'd meter in the middle around the nose, and I'd meter on the dark side, and then you'd get 3 readings, and what your fall off is like, and then you can adjust your you can adjust your actual aperture on the camera to suit the amount of light you want your camera to capture when the flash fires. So if you want to push the blacks right down to black, the shadows right down to black, then you would have a smaller aperture because that will let less light in. This is the bit that always gets me though, right? If you want it to be brighter, you need a lower number, and it's like no, brighter must be higher. Surely it's like no, because a lower number aperture is actually a bigger hole, right? Okay, so a bigger hole means more light, and I always have to think it through step by step, and then I always get it wrong. Always get it wrong.
Yeah.
So this is way deep for me because I just look when I'm using a flash meter, I just put my flash meter where I think it should be, right? So and then I measure it, and then I set my camera up, and then that's what I go with. But the thing is, I suppose there's so many things about film. There is as you said the latitude of the film, right? So you don't. With modern film, certainly you don't have to get the exposure completely right. And then, of course, after the development, there's the scanning process, and a lot of this. So as for all I know, I could have been chronically over or underexposing for years, and I'd never know about it because the lab sorts it all out when they do the scanning. I just don't know, and it's built into the film tolerance. So
yeah, and one thing that's great too is if you use a consistent film, or if you keep doing the same thing and it works, then it works for you.
Why change it? Yes, because it's the outcome. So yes. So I know how to use these things, and I know how to get a result out of them. And then I know little bits of extra things like you always need if you're shooting in snow, you always need to overexpose compared to what your meter is telling you because it's trying to make the white snow grey.
Exactly. That's a great example with a reflective light meter because it's reading the light that's reflecting off of the snow, and it's saying, okay, that's grey, we'll make it grey.
Yes. Yeah, you want me to make this grey, right? Okay, here's the exposure to make that grey, and that's why cameras will often underexpose snow by 2 stops.
Yep.
Although, of course, you wouldn't get that. You're absolutely right. You wouldn't get that with an incident meter for snow because actually what you're doing is you're just putting the meter near the snow and asking it to measure how much light is falling upon it, not how much the snow is reflecting. So you would get a truer exposure reading for that way. This stuff is hard, isn't it?
It's a pain.
But, hey, it is a pain. We I don't know how long we've been talking. It feels like we've been talking for a good length of time, and we're deep down the rabbit hole, and I'm enjoying every minute of it.
I want to let's wrap up this little discussion on getting the correct exposure, just with a kind of trip down memory lane, because there is another way that people used to use quite often to get the right exposure with a flash, and it's something called guide numbers. I don't know. Do you remember guide numbers, or do you know what those are?
I do, but I never figured out how to use them. And by the time I learnt about them, they were effectively long obsolete.
It's a lovely idea, which requires some level of paying attention and doing some arithmetic. But basically, it's saying, okay, this flash has a guide number of X. And that means that at this distance, at this power, you need this aperture. So it's kind of like these old sunny tables that you've got on the back of some old cameras where it says, bright sunlight, you need 1/100th of a second at f4 or something like that. Yeah. And it's kind of a similar idea. The only extra thing that is brought in with these guide numbers is the distance to your subject from the flash. So you've got, 1.5 meters distance, it's going to be full power or whatever it is.
So I did an exercise once when I was doing a lot of flash photography with film some years ago. I made a little PDF file that I put on my phone. And I could always, and so that was my own guide numbering system, if you like. So it was, if I am shooting my flash at, I can't remember which were the variables and which were the constant. I ended up with several tables that in the spreadsheet that I then created a PDF file out of so I could read it easily on my phone. And it said things like, if you are shooting 4 feet away from your subject at half power, hit this table here will help you plot which aperture and ISO you need. Not ISO, sorry. No, it would be ISO because there is a level of sensitivity to it, but not shutter speed. So if I was shooting at 4 feet away at half power, at 200 ISO, at f4, that's going to work, right? And so I made myself a set of tables I could refer to that said, okay, so my light is, so if my light was 8 feet away, so all right, okay, I'll go and look at the table that's 8 feet away. And I know I want to be shooting at f4 because it's a portrait, and I want to get the whole of the head in focus, but I want the background to drop away. So right, okay, 8 feet at f4. What flash power do I need for what ISO on my camera, and things like that. And that I found that when I was doing a lot of that shooting, that was really useful because I didn't have to worry about test shots too much. If I only had a film camera with me, I could get in a ballpark with that.
Yeah,
because I'd done the working out, I'd done the test shots and written down the answers.
Yeah, and as long as you stay at the same distance, that won't change. So you can do whatever you want. And let's say you've got you're doing portraits and you've got the flash on top of your camera. As long as your subject stays the same distance from the camera, you're good.
Yeah,
you can just do whatever you want.
Yeah. So yeah, either that or you've got to make sure you look at the right table, because you end up with half a dozen of these tables for different distances and different setups and stuff like that. Then you end up having to make sure you're looking at the right thing. So all good, interesting stuff though. Yeah, it can be. For me, it's a very enjoyable part of the art of photography. Is also the technical craft of these things. I just find it interesting. It appeals to me,
Absolutely. And once you kind of get a bite into it and you kind of get the basic understanding of how these things work, and then, you start with one light and you figure out what that does. And then you start adding other lights and, bouncing them around and doing all kinds of different things. You got a reflector and a light, and you got a constant light and a flash and a reflector and a ND filter, and you're adding all these different variables together. And sometimes it's fun just to do that just for the sake of doing it. But ideally, you have some kind of idea that you're trying to achieve with all of your, creative use of different equipment, and that you're then able to make something that you want to make with that image. And whether it's your tabletop photography, or if it's a portrait, or if it's a real estate shot where you're making the house glow or whatever it is, there's all kinds of fun stuff you can do.
One of my favorite things to do is to do outdoor environmental portraits with flash. And if you want to make it really difficult, use film as well. I've got actually we should probably talk about this at some other point in time, but because it's a bit of a tangent. But I've got a portrait shoot I did some years ago. Of a friend sitting in his racetrack car. It wasn't a competition car, but it was a track car. And we were out at Donington in the north of England one evening, and I said, let's take some photos of you in the car. So at the end of the evening, wait till it was just sunset, red sky. It was just after sunset, red sky hitting the clouds, and it's a really nice sky in the background. And I had a light stand and a softbox. And trying to figure out how it is that I could get a nice photo of my friend in this car, and it was a Caterham type clone, which is an open top car, so it was easy to get the light into the car to hit him, because it had no roof. And then you say, it's okay, what are we doing? Okay, so I want the sky to look great. So I need to set my ambient exposure in the camera so that the sky looks good.
And you control that with your shutter speed.
Yes. So I went into the sky with my incident meter. No, I didn't do that. I just pointed the camera at the sky. So not the composition I was going for. I pointed the camera, which had a reliable meter in it, at the sky, and got a read on the sky. So I knew my camera settings had to be some variant of that exposure. So yes, I could change the aperture to get the flash right, but I also then had to correspondingly change the shutter to make sure that the ambient exposure stayed the same, right? So it did that, and then I must have had a flash meter with me, because I couldn't have done it otherwise. Figured out what aperture I wanted to shoot at. and therefore how much light I needed, and blah blah blah. So did all of that, and I thought this is great. This is really, and then the shots came out completely different, in a really nice way in the end. And what I had not pre-visualized was, and I think pre-visualization probably needs to be a topic of a whole thing on its own, but just to segue into it, and maybe for another show. But what I'd not pre-visualized was the spread of the light. The spread of the light was actually far bigger.
Okay.
But it ended up with being a really nice result, actually, because instead of just lighting him in the cab of the car, it lit the long bonnet in front as well. And so, that was interesting. Anyway, but as I say, probably this far into the conversation, I think we probably need to do things like pre-visualization and actually working these scenes. I think they deserve a show of their own, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. But let's do this. We've talked a lot about all of these different things and a lot of numbers, and anybody who's still listening to us is probably half asleep now with all of these f-stops and shutter speeds and that sort of thing. So maybe why don't we each go kind of back and forth and just share some suggestions or tips for people who are getting started, really simple things that would make this, where would you start? What would you want to do to start getting into Flash? Let's say you've got your first Flash, you've got a trigger, you've got a camera. What would be some things that you would suggest? Maybe we can kind of bounce back and forth until we run out of good suggestions.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so I was going to say the first thing to do would be to get some sort of triggering system, but you've put that in the scenario because you have far more creative opportunities available to you if you can get that light off the top of the camera.
Definitely.
So I would say first tip, easiest way to soften a light is to bounce it off something.
Okay.
Right. So let's say you have a reasonably neutrally coloured wall. You could put your subject near the wall and you could fire the flash at the wall. It then becomes a massive, great soft reflector and you will really soften the light. Don't point the flash at the subject.
Yeah, that's a great tip. One of my tips would be to create just one variable and try different exposures with one variable. So maybe it would be you've got your subject, you've got your camera, you've got your room, that's all locked in, it's not moving, and you move the flash. Keep the distance to your subject the same and move the flash behind them, to the side, on top, below, and just play with that and see what kind of different effects you can make.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So another one for me would be it's another bounce one, I'm afraid. This time it's bouncing off the ceiling. Right. So if you you may not have a wall handy, but actually if you want to take a photograph of maybe more than one person, so let's say you're having a family gathering and there's a couple of aunties sat on a sofa, a way to light them in a flattering and reasonably even way would be to bounce your light off the ceiling, because that then will use the ceiling as a big a reflector, because it doesn't go through the ceiling unless you've got a really powerful light, to go through the ceiling.
That's what we're getting to in exposure
absolutely
levels.
Yeah, that's where the exposure comes in. Yeah, so to bounce that. So again, these are good ways of not having to carry around massive great soft boxes with diffusers and or scrims that they use on movie sets and TVs and stuff like that. So it's to make the light spread.
Yep.
That'd be my second tip.
All right. Well, my next tip would be start with a digital camera. It's just you'll learn much quicker, and it'll be much more joyful, I think, until you get the hang of it.
Okay, that makes my next one easy. If you don't have a digital camera, use an instant camera. You don't need to necessarily have an instant back, as long as you know what your instant camera is capable of and what it's shooting. So if you know what shutter speed it's got and what because if you think like a Fuji Instax camera, they come with was it usually f12.7 or something like that, isn't it? Something it's some weird fixed aperture. So if you know what that is, and you can either cover or switch off the flash, then you can get some idea of what things are going to look like.
I guess the next thing is just try it. Just go out and do it.
Yes, definitely. I think I've maybe got one more to close then, which is that if you have a film point and shoot camera, you can use the built-in flash to trigger all the rest of your lights. This is not really a beginner tip, but because it's blooming hard work most of the time. So, but I've done this. I've shot with off-camera speed lights using an instant camera, an Instax camera, and the way I did it was to let the in-camera flash fire, but direct that light away. So you literally would, like, by putting taping a bit of card to sort of deflect it off at an angle. And if you can get it to just do a little flash of light, and you set your speed lights into slave mode, which simply means that they will fire when they see something else firing. So they'll sit there patiently and calmly, and as soon as they detect a flash of light, they will then fire themselves. And because the speed of light is faster than your average photographer, it looks like it all happened at the same time. So that is so if you have a point and shoot camera that has got a built-in flash, and you're thinking, oh, how on earth can I work with off-camera flash, and how on earth if all you've got is that, and you want ways to be creative, then absolutely it is possible. I've yet to find a way to do it with a mobile phone, because flashes for mobile phones are not really flashes, and so other things won't respond to them.
I have seen some systems for that are dedicated for using a phone for flash, but I think they're ridiculously expensive. They're like built into the Ellen Chrome system or something like that.
Yeah, so. I mean, I think I once had a Loom Cube that had a Bluetooth to the phone, and it would say that it would do it, but actually it didn't. The flash duration was like the thick end of a second.
Okay.
So what it was doing is like, oh right, you're getting ready to shoot. Right, I'll switch the light on, and then I'll let you shoot, and then and then it'll go off. So there was a massive lag from when you press the shutter button to when the photo was taken, because you had to allow for the light to fire up and the speed of the Bluetooth processing and stuff like that. So it is hard. Right. But in fact, I guess the lesson there is even if as long as you've got some way of emitting some light, right, even from an on-camera flash on an instant camera, an Instax camera, it is possible. And creatively quite fun. I remember once, I think I did this for a Sunny 16 assignment many years ago, a self-portrait assignment. I spent a whole evening in the den in our house trying to take a self-portrait with my Instax camera on timer mode, right? So I was able to, just as long as I was sat in the right place, because of course Instax film doesn't have much latitude.
No, it's very finicky, I think.
So you have to get your lighting quite right. So I needed to be needed to be in a really defined distance from the light. And so I managed to get it so that the camera was on a tripod, and I could just reach out. And as long as it was on its 10-second exposure, and then I could just reach out without moving on the sofa that I was sat on. So if I held my head in just the right position, and if I bent the light out of the camera the right way so that my speed light in the softbox could be triggered by it and stuff like that, all of these things needed to be true to get any kind of decent exposure. But I did it I think it took me a whole pack. Or maybe it was 2 packs. I don't know. Probably only 1 pack to get one shot.
Okay.
Yeah, the 10th shot in the pack was the one that actually all came together.
That was the good one.
That was the good one, yeah.
All right. Well, cool. Well, I think we've definitely talked enough about this for now. And
I could go on.
Oh yeah, me too.
But we should probably stop.
We probably should stop. Yeah, at some point we should stop. And we'll pick this up or other conversations about lighting in the near future, I think.
Yeah, definitely we will. Yes,
we've managed to figure out the YouTube, so there are YouTube videos of episodes. Well, actually, 0 and 1 are on the Sunny 16 channel. They're a year or two old with John.
Years ago with John, yes.
The episodes 2 and 3 are now on the Sunny 16 Presents YouTube channel.
Yes, we have a Sunny 16 Presents YouTube channel, everybody.
Go look it up. 2 videos on it now, and this one will be the third. So
this one will be the third. Thank you for persevering with that, John Michael.
Sure.
That. I know that was a bit of a challenge to get that to work.
Well, just getting Google to believe that we are who we say we are and want to post videos.
Yes, but we got there in the end. Well, I say we. No, it definitely wasn't a we. It was a you. You did it, and thank you for persevering.
Sure. Well, I figure you got your hands full with all the other podcasts that you're working on.
It is a bit like that. Yeah, it is a bit like that. But hey, it's a labour of love.
Indeed. Well, that was enough for us for tonight, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Cool. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.